Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Teryn Wolfe, Director of Corporate Development and Strategic Relationships at Matrix Food Technology, and our esteemed panel.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of finance in Latin America. And joining us today on this panel is Matt Keller. And Matt is the Director of Impact and Inclusion at the Algorand Foundation. We also have Jagruti Solanki, who's the CFO at BitPay, and Luis Felipe Monteiro, who is the former Secretary of Digital Government at Brazil's Ministry of the Economy, and the current CEO of Catena. So I'm sure you guys are going to hear a lot of interesting things from them today. So what we're going to talk about today is what does finance look like in Latin America in the future? I think the pandemic drove a lot of changes in terms of private sector, in terms of how government responds to the financial sector, and as well in terms of just the demand, correct? So starting this conversation, I wanted to direct the first question to Luis Felipe. And I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about your experience in Brazil. And what was one of the most important takeaways for Latin American leaders from your experience to achieve greater financial inclusion in Latin America?
Thank you. Regarding Brazil, first, we have a huge population, 230 million people. And during the pandemic, we were able to digitize the entire population. We are with now more than 85% of the Brazilians included in the financial sector. And this was possible because first, we digitized the entire government services. All the transactions within the government are now accessed through the internet or mobile apps, things like that. We put Brazil in the 7th place, according to the World Bank, into the most, between the most digitized governments in the world. Then we updated our financial sector, increasing competition. So the central bank institutes an instant payment platform that was huge and very important to replace cash in daily lives of the people. During the pandemic, also, we peeled the entire emergency benefits transferring through digital technologies. So every one of the 65 million Brazilians that received emergency aid during the pandemic got a digital account and were able to use it for digital payments, also for cash transfers or withdrawal, things like that. So in general, first I think policymakers and government officials, central banks should understand that digital currency, digital technologies, digital finance is the future. And the standard money transfer technology that we are used to have will not be in the near future something that people will like to use. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. And I think there are quite a few things in that answer that maybe we can break down. And I would direct the next question to you, Jagruti, about what's the role of the private sector in digitalizing government and also making sure that that transfers to this population that's benefiting from financial inclusion and from digital inclusion as well too.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, for private sector specifically, being open to alternative forms of payment that are digital today, right? Like, for example, you mentioned cash, right? At some point, I do see a world where, you'll have digital cash, whether it's a central bank digital currency that's issued by a government, or it could be a cryptocurrency that's issued on a blockchain, based on some sort of blockchain technology. I'm with BitPay. One of the things we do is we process crypto payments. Today we process about $1 billion worth of crypto payments, and the adoption in the private sector is pretty significant. I would say maybe past 2 years, we are seeing a lot of merchants looking to accept crypto and offer crypto as a form of payment to their consumers as an alternative way to pay. And companies like BitPay, and there are a couple others out there, make it pretty easy for merchants to be able to do that. Number one, cryptocurrency is not something that you can easily just dabble into. Depending on how the processing works, it could get complicated. So one of the goals is, to simplify the entire crypto payment workflow as much as possible for a user or a consumer to be able to, make a payment for their merchandise. So kind of keeping that goal in mind, I do see a future where there will be a digital something, digital crypto, digital form of cash that will be used for payments, and we are seeing a pretty decent growth in private sector adopting that.
Okay, that's really interesting, and crypto is exciting, and it sounds really exciting, and I think it also might be something difficult to implement. And just the digital technology piece. And speaking to that, Matt, you have a lot of experience in education and in financial education. So talk to us a little bit about some of your experiences in digital education or financial education, and how that comes into this whole mix of how we actually make this work, right? It's not just a policy, and it's not just the process or the platform. There has to be this implementation piece or this ability to do that. So talk to us a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, so and I think I agree that digital currencies are the future for sure. At Algorand, we're trying to help facilitate and expedite that. But in terms of education, I mean, it's interesting. During the pandemic, a lot of countries lost a generation of kids. They fell far behind in reading, writing, and mathematics. And when you fall behind in reading, you often don't catch up as a child, which is the unfortunate reality. One country, though, did quite well, which is Uruguay. They instituted a one laptop policy in 2007, and they embraced it wholly. Every child in the country received a laptop. Every child had, over time, access to the internet. And over time, the software became more dynamic, more intuitive, and more, it was more able to kind of, in a sense, speak to the child. So when the pandemic hit, the country seamlessly went into kind of virtual and digitalized learning. And the result was that there isn't a lost generation, that these kids are equipped to deal with a future that is, in fact, becoming increasingly digital in every aspect of our lives. And when you look at the different countries in the region, you see that particularly the poorest kids in Latin America suffered the most, which is true in general all over the world, which is true in general, period, right? But in education, those were the ones that didn't have access to any kind of digitalized virtual learning. And when it's done well, not as a way to supplant any teacher or educational system, but as a way to supplement it, particularly in times of crisis, it works quite well. And what that means generationally in terms of finance and in terms of economic growth is you can quantify it, and you can say that for every percentage drop in illiteracy, you get a percentage increase in GDP, but it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. So I think these platforms work. I think that where I sit now at Algorand, which is a blockchain company, we see the use of technology becoming more and more rapidly adopted in every sector of our lives, beyond education.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I think there's another piece to this puzzle as well, too, which is the infrastructure. I have the knowledge, but if I have an account, how do I access that account? And then how do I access that account if I don't have access to internet, or if I live in a rural area? And I'm really interested in the numbers in Brazil, because you guys achieved some really amazing numbers in terms of financial inclusion. And so how did you, I'd like to hear from all three of you on this point. How did you achieve that from that infrastructure standpoint and understanding barriers that a lot of these citizens are facing?
Yeah, first, this is a huge challenge for us since Brazil is a big country with many different geographics and with many challenges regarding to establish infrastructure. But what was important first is the private sector was responsible for that, not the public sector. So our telecom infrastructure agency was able to accelerate and invest on new regulations to accelerate and to make sure that the private sector companies, the telecom companies, will be able to reach distant areas. So we are working with many different technologies for that, but in the most challenging areas, we are using satellites to get internet to the population. And right now, Brazil is one of the top 4 countries in number of internet users in the world. So we have a huge consumption of content and also financial services. A Brazilian usually stays for 9 hours per day in the internet. This is 30% more than a regular American, for instance. So it was challenging, but we are getting there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Like when I think about coming from a digital payment space, right, you clearly need internet to process anything digital, right? But one of the trends that we are seeing is, and part of it is maybe COVID, where it's pushing merchants, private sector mainly, to go more electronic, more digital, right? Like the physical stores, at some point you see e-commerce, the trend on selling everything online, definitely increasing. And then that's when we are seeing merchants all across the world, especially Latin America, looking to accept any form of digital currency, however the consumer wants to pay. And like for example, at BitPay, we support 100 different wallets. So you don't even need to have a BitPay wallet to make a payment. You could have any wallet from anything that, a wallet that that can be supported by the company. So using that wallet, you make your payment. Just go online, check out if the merchant is accepting crypto as payment. You're able to do that literally sitting from anywhere. And I think a lot of consumers and users are understanding the importance of being able to do that. And from anywhere in the seat. The other option I would say, without internet, like you could also use a debit card where you could load the debit card with crypto and then be able to use the debit card instantly anywhere, even if the merchant is not accepting crypto. And for that, you don't need internet. For whatever reason, say I have internet for 5 minutes and I'm able to load my debit card in that 5 minutes, that's it. Now my debit card is loaded with fiat that I can use literally globally anywhere. So there are other alternative ways where we are seeing people kind of get around and yet be able to do what they have to do. But that said, it's still a challenge, lack of infrastructure, and to your point, public sector is definitely the one pushing that kind of adoption.
And that the 5-minute interval window is interesting because sometimes that's what you have. And what we find is really interesting. We invest in entrepreneurs and institutions, at least from my place in the foundation, who are focused on financial inclusion, social impact, and environmental sustainability. And what we find, particularly in the financial inclusion space, is that these entrepreneurs on the ground, whether it's Harare, Zimbabwe, whether it's Kabul, Afghanistan, whether it's somewhere in Patagonia in Argentina, they're really creative in how they get people access to payments, to banking, to education. And in some cases, in Harare, for example, where it's very remote and internet access is very low, WhatsApp is used. Yeah. So there are ways to do this, and we look for those entrepreneurs in those parts of the world. We invested in a company in Latin America that are kind of providing internet access very, very, very cheaply And again, at those kind of intervals, which is really important when you need to download something and you have it in your wallet and you can use that wallet for a whole host of things. And what we also find, and I've found all over the world, whether it's been in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, and wherever, in Afghanistan, is that the smartphone, whether it's just a very low-end smartphone, is growing in ubiquity. Everywhere you go, somebody has one. And what that means for the receipt and the spending of digital currency, or having an identification that proves who you are, is on that phone that people care for a great deal. It's almost, in a sense, a sacrosanct thing. So there are ways to get around it. The hardware exists that allows these wallets to take place, to be developed and to be used. And as they grow, again, in ubiquity, and as this technology gets more and more sophisticated, and as people get more and more, begin to understand more and more of it, it will grow, as you said earlier.
Yeah. I'll add one more thing. One of the things with digital currency is the reach that it has to the unbanked, which is huge, right? And it's a good enough incentive for someone with lack of internet to go get it, because maybe they don't have banking options, and maybe this is their only kind of choice. Also, if you kind of think about credit card payment fees, like today, 3% to 4% something. With the digital currency, it could be nothing. If you use a BitPay, then it's 1%. So those kind of incentives, kind of, you kind of do the math, and you're like, okay, maybe it's worth investing in, like, say, some sort of infrastructure to go on board with it.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. This morning, I was looking at the Findex report, and what I found really interesting in this report is that when we're looking at financial inclusion, we're not only looking at metrics like number of accounts or how many transactions have been made per country, but also breaking it down a little bit more to understand who's actually making those transactions and who owns those accounts. And one thing that was found is that still there's a very large gender gap in terms of digital inclusion and financial inclusion. And not only a gender gap, but also there's an ethnic gap. And that's both across accounts and transactions as well, too. And I think that's a difficult thing to address, especially I think for a company like BitPay that's working across many different cultures and in many different countries. How do we address that? I imagine there's no silver bullet, but I guess either from, maybe we can address this, all of you as working in private organizations, how do you start to address that gap? Do you want to start, Matt?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think, again, I think with the blockchain technology, particularly Algorand's, which is very fast, it's never been down, we can do, millions of transactions per second. It allows the unbanked of this world, 1.7 billion people are unbanked, the majority of whom are women, the overwhelming majority of whom are poor. They can avail themselves of financial services, they can avail themselves of local and global marketplaces, and it begins to bring them into not just a local economy, but a global economy, because it's borderless, right? You have access, you have very low transaction costs, as you said, maybe 0.1 cent in our case, and it's borderless. So if you're going to come up with a silver bullet, and there are no silver bullets, but as close as you can get to including the unbanked in this world, I think blockchain technology, and at Algorand we believe this strongly, is the way to bring people in and to increase the amount of money that people have, which I think over time will decrease the kind of the grotesque inequality that we see in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would ditto everything you said. I mean, I think the outreach it has to the unbanked, and once they kind of see the benefits of it, the technology may sound complicated, but it is not. It just takes a few attempts to dabble with, create a wallet. That's the easiest thing to do. Create a wallet, have something, store a micro piece of, crypto in your wallet, and as soon as you do that, there are apps out there that can make your payment processing or anything you want to do with crypto pretty easy. So I think it's, it's just a question of, the outreach, which today's institution don't really give that option.
Actually, I think first we must work to get the women independent. They should be financially independent. So female entrepreneurship programs are important to get the poor women into the formal sector and to create that independence. Also in Brazil, the financial hub for a family is the woman, the mother of that family. So all the social benefits, emergency aids and continuing aids, are delivered to the woman that holds the family. So this is important to balance, and I think we are moving to a more balanced financial sector. I just want to highlight another point, that since Cateno is a payments processing company, we hold 30 million clients, and in Brazil we process $100 billion per year in debit and credit cards. So we are now looking forward to the new generation of payments, where not only people but things will be paying. So all the things we talked earlier about the infrastructure and everything, it's highly impacted, where you have trillions of sensors and machines making payments online. The requirements for the technology that we use for payments are different in this new generation. So I agree that decentralized finance, blockchain technologies, all of those things we mentioned are important and will be key elements for this payments of things in the future.
That's good.
We only have a few minutes left, and I feel like there are infrastructure questions that can be solved, and there's so many digital possibilities, and I think crypto is opening up an entirely new world of opportunities. But what about the qualitative aspect of the future of finance and financial inclusion? Especially now that post-pandemic, what we're seeing is recession or fear of recession. I think we see a lot of people that are really stressed, scared about what's going to happen to economies globally. How does that qualitative piece play into the financial inclusion piece? And I guess, what about how do we handle within the future of finance and financial and digital inclusion the financial stress or worry piece? And I guess if we have both this infrastructure and this qualitative piece, what would you guys, if you had 30 seconds to make one recommendation to a lot of really important decision makers that are sitting in this audience, what would you recommend that one thing that they really focus on and tackle would be?
I would mention regulation. So open finance is a way for that. So if the government regulates the financial sector as an open environment, an open ecosystem where multiple companies can share data about their clients and to increase the level of the number of products and services they provide, this is, I think, a smart way to move for a more financial inclusion. So it's the private sector, the entrepreneurs around us that will have creativity to get those people outside the financial sector and bring them inside. So we must create the environment, create the platforms, create the regulation for them to work faster, easier, and more reliable.
Yeah, I would say, regulation I think is huge, especially in the crypto space, right? Working very closely with regulators, whether it's the licensing authorities or the states or the feds or even accounting or tax authorities, right? Working very closely with them and educating them on, here is what consumers are doing, here's what merchants are doing, here's how the use cases that we are seeing. Because many times what we are seeing is regulators want to help and regulate with all the right intention, but they don't have all the use cases. They don't know what's going on at the field as much as companies outside do. So I think working closely with them, educating them, that's huge. The other thing I would say is working closely with centralized institutions and banks and whoever, all the traditional institutions, so to speak. At some point, I do see a hybrid world of decentralized and centralized, at least in the near future. And there are ways to work together. Like for example, today we partner with Bitso, which is the largest cryptocurrency exchange in Latin America. And with that, we have access to everyone in Latin America, right? So I think those partnership and synergies, and one of the things I believe in is 1 + 1 is 3. So that model can be used by any company and to kind of reach everyone in the unbanked.
Mm-hmm.
And just quickly, I know we're out of time, but I agreed, and I think connectivity, the internet is a human right, that if we're going to expand the universe of people taking advantage of financial services, of access to capital, of access to marketplaces, the poorest in the world being able to expand their universe beyond the closest shore, you have to be able to connect, and I think governments can play a big role in making sure that happens, not to mention the example I started off with in the beginning, where in the country of Uruguay, those kids didn't fall behind, and they didn't fall behind because they were connected.
Great. Wow, so that's a lot of information and many, many years of experience wrapped up in this short panel. No silver bullet. This is an ecosystem of solutions, and I think we're at the right place to do it. So thank you very much to all of you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.